The Arizona Territory stretched endlessly under a sky caught between night and dawn. Jacob McKenna had been riding since before the stars began to fade, his weathered buckskin horse Dust moving with quiet certainty through the emptiness. They had traveled this way for 3 days now, following no particular trail, seeking no specific destination. 3 weeks ago, he had buried his wife Sarah and 7-year-old daughter Emma beside the creek behind their Colorado homestead. Typhoid fever had taken them both, leaving Jacob alone in a cabin that suddenly felt too large and too quiet. So he had saddled Dust and ridden south into the vastness of the Southwest, moving until the ache in his chest might find some space to breathe. As the horizon began to blush with sunrise, Dust suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward. Jacob straightened, scanning the landscape ahead. That's when he saw her. She sat among red sandstone rocks about 50 yards ahead, so still he first thought she might be a trick of the uncertain light. But as his eyes adjusted, he could make out a woman, small, hunched over as if protecting something in her lap, dark hair falling around her face. Jacob dismounted slowly. As they drew closer, he could see she was young, dressed in a simple blue dress that had seen better days. Her feet were bare and bloodied. She looked up as his shadow fell across her, and Jacob felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were deep brown, but held an emptiness he recognized, the look of someone who had lost everything. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other in the growing dawn light. "Are you real?" Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse as if she hadn't used it in days. "Yes, ma'am," Jacob replied quietly. "I'm real." She nodded slowly. "I thought maybe I was dying, and you were some kind of vision." "No vision, just a man on a horse, traveling through." She shifted slightly, and Jacob caught sight of what she protected, a small bundle wrapped in torn fabric. His stomach tightened. He recognized the particular way a woman held a child. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Elena Vasquez." "I'm Jacob McKenna." He touched his hat brim. "Elena, I can see you're in a bad way, and this country doesn't forgive folks who give up on themselves." Elena looked down at the bundle, then back at him. "He was born too early," she said quietly. 3 days ago. He never even cried. Just came into this world and left it again, quiet as a whisper. Jacob felt his throat tighten. "I'm sorry." His father said it was God's will, said maybe it was for the best, since we couldn't afford another mouth to feed. Her voice was flat, which made the words more devastating than tears. "I hit him across the face and walked out into the desert with my baby." Jacob understood. Sometimes a person had to walk until the pain either killed them or transformed into something bearable. "How long have you been out here?" 3 days, maybe 4. Time moves strange when you're dying. Jacob looked at her small frame, sunburned skin, cracked lips. She was dying, but she wasn't dead yet. He knelt down carefully. "Elena, I'm going to ask you something. Do you want to live?" The question hung in the air like desert heat. Elena stared at him, weighing the question with the seriousness it deserved. This wasn't about rescue. This was about choice. Her choice. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know if I remember how." "That's honest," Jacob said. "That's a start." He walked back to Dust and returned with his water canteen. "Why don't we start with this? 1 sip at a time, see how it goes." Eleanor looked at the canteen, then at Jacob's face. Something passed between them. Recognition. 2 people who had lost everything, finding each other in the vastness of nothing. She reached out with one trembling hand and took the canteen. Elena drank slowly, as if she had forgotten her body needed water. Jacob watched her shoulders relax slightly as the liquid eased her thirst. When she handed the canteen back, he felt the fever heat radiating from her skin. "We need to get you out of this sun," he said. "There's a trading post about 10 miles east, run by a woman named Mary Clearwater." Eleanor shook her head weakly. "I can't pay for anything." "It's what people do for each other out here," Jacob said quietly. "Your boy deserves a proper burial, and you deserve a chance to say goodbye the right way." This reached her. She looked down at the small bundle, and tears finally gathered in her eyes. "I don't know how to let him go," she whispered. "Nobody does," Jacob said, "but we learn." The sun was fully up now, heat building. "You have to decide, right now, before it gets worse." Elena looked at the endless desert, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. "All right." Jacob helped her to her feet and boosted her onto Dust's back, then swung up behind her. She leaned back against his chest, trembling from weakness and fever. They rode in silence through the morning heat. About halfway to the trading post, Elena spoke. "You lost someone," she said. "Yes, my wife and daughter, 3 weeks ago." "I'm sorry." "Me too." The trading post appeared like a mirage, adobe buildings surrounded by cottonwood trees. Mary Clearwater, a weathered woman with grey hair, was sweeping her porch. She took one look at them and understood immediately. "Bring her inside," Mary said simply. "I'll get water boiling." Jacob helped Elena down. Mary stepped forward and gently took the bundle from Elena's arms. "What was his name?" Mary asked softly. Elena struggled. "I never had time to." "Then we'll give him one now," Mary said firmly. "A proper name for a proper goodbye." Elena looked at Mary with cracking composure. "Gabriel," she whispered. "His name is Gabriel." Mary nodded solemnly. "Gabriel, an angel's name." Jacob watched Mary lead Elena inside while he remained outside, looking at the vast sky. 3 weeks ago he had been a husband and father. Now he was helping a stranger bury her child. Inside, Mary had settled Elena by the window and was cleaning her wounds. "How long since you've eaten?" Mary asked. "I don't remember," Elena admitted. Mary prepared a simple meal while Jacob found a shovel and walked to a spot under the big cottonwood. The ground was hard, but he found something meditative in the rhythm. Thrust, lift, toss. Each shovelful was a small act of service. When the grave was ready, Jacob returned to find Elena sleeping. Mary sat cradling baby Gabriel in her arms. "She's exhausted body and soul," Mary said quietly, "but she's stronger than she thinks. Will she be all right? That depends on whether she can find a reason to want to be." As the sun began to set, the 3 of them walked to the grave. Eleanor, supported by Jacob and Mary, carried herself with quiet dignity despite her weakness. Mary had wrapped Gabriel in clean white cloth and placed him in a small wooden box. At the graveside, Mary asked gently, "Would you like to say something?" Eleanor stood at the edge of the grave, looking down. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite her tears. "Gabriel, you were with me for such a short time, but you were real. You were mine, and I will carry you with me wherever I go." Jacob found words coming from deep inside him. "May you rest in peace, and may your mother find the strength to live in a way that honors your memory." Mary added a simple prayer. Then Jacob carefully lowered the box and began filling the grave. Elena watched without speaking, her tears falling silently. When it was finished, Mary placed a small wooden cross at the head, carved with Gabriel and the date. Elena knelt and placed her hand on the fresh earth. As they walked back, Elena suddenly stopped. She looked up at Jacob with eyes no longer empty. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For giving me a choice, for not deciding for me whether I should live or die." Jacob nodded. "What will you choose now?" Elena looked back at the grave, then up at the stars beginning to appear. "I think I choose to see what tomorrow looks like." It wasn't much, Jacob thought, but it was a beginning. Elena slept for 14 hours straight, and when she emerged from the trading post the next morning, she looked different, still fragile but no longer actively dying. Mary had given her a clean brown dress, and her dark hair was braided back from her face. "How do you feel?" Jacob asked, as she settled beside him on the porch steps. "Empty," Elena said honestly, "but not destroyed. Not anymore." They watched the desert wake up around them in comfortable silence. "Mary says you're traveling with no particular destination," Elena said after a while. "That's right. I've never done that. My whole life I've gone from one place to another because I had to." Elena told him about her village in Sonora, her family's journey north. meeting Miguel in a mining camp outside Tucson. He couldn't understand why I was grieving for Gabriel, she said quietly. To him, it was like mourning a stillborn calf, sad maybe, but not worth stopping the world over. Jacob understood that feeling, when the structure of your life revealed itself to be made of paper and wishes. Mary emerged with coffee and biscuits. "Elena, we need to discuss practical matters," she said, settling into a chair. "You can't go back to your husband, and you can't stay here indefinitely." Elena listed her skills: cooking, cleaning, sewing, some knowledge of healing herbs from her grandmother. "There's a town called Cedar Ridge, about a week's ride north," Jacob found himself saying. "They were looking for someone to help at the boarding house when I passed through." Both women looked at him with surprise. "I could escort you there," he heard himself offering. "Make sure you get settled safely." Eleanor studied his face. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Jacob said simply, "and because I need to remember what the right thing feels like." They spent the day preparing for the journey. As evening approached, Elena visited Gabriel's grave one last time. "I don't know how to leave him here and go on living," she said quietly. "You carry him with you," Jacob said. "Not the grief. That will fade some with time. But the love stays." Eleanor asked about his wife and daughter, and Jacob found he could speak about the typhoid fever that took them more easily than before. "I'm learning that being sorry isn't the same as being finished," he said. "There's still some reason to keep waking up every morning, even when you can't see what it is." "Maybe that's enough for now," Elena said softly. "Some reason, even if we don't know what it is." Tomorrow they would begin the journey to Cedar Ridge. Tonight, under the vast sky, two broken people had found companionship in their shared understanding of loss. The morning they left Mary's trading post dawned clear and cool. Elena sat straight in the saddle of the gentle mare Mary had sold them, her few possessions packed in worn saddlebags. Jacob rode beside her on dust, leading a pack mule with their supplies. Eleanor had made one final visit to Gabriel's grave at dawn. When she returned to where Jacob waited with the horses, her face was set with quiet determination. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she said, and Jacob believed she meant it. The trail to Cedar Ridge wound through red rock formations and vast mesas. For the first few hours, they rode in comfortable silence, adjusting to the rhythm of travel. Elena, despite her inexperience with long journeys, was a natural rider. "My grandfather had a burro when I was small," she explained when Jacob commented on her skill. "He taught me that animals know when you're afraid." As the morning wore on, Elena began sharing stories of her childhood in Sonora, her family's journey north. "My mother used to say that leaving home was like being born again, painful and frightening, but necessary if you wanted to grow." "What kind of life did you want?" Jacob asked. "I wanted to choose," Elena said simply, "to have some say in my own story, even if I chose badly sometimes." They rode through increasingly dramatic country, towering spires of red rock and deep canyons. On the second day, they encountered a family heading south, their faces carrying the weariness of broken dreams. After the family continued on, Elena was quieter. "They assumed we were married," she said. "It's strange, like being caught between one life and another, belonging fully to neither." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Jacob said. "Being between lives gives you room to figure out who you want to be next." That night, camped beside a stream, Elena asked about Sarah. Jacob found he could speak about his wife more easily now. She was stubborn and smart and completely fearless about things that mattered to her, he said with a slight smile. "You must miss them terribly," Elena said, "every day. But missing them and being destroyed by missing them are two different things. I'm learning the difference." "How?" "By doing things that honor what they meant to me," Jacob said. "Sarah always said that love was something you did, not just something you felt." Eleanor was quiet for a long time. "I used to talk to Gabriel when I was carrying him. I had so many plans." "Those are good plans," Jacob said quietly. Important plans. But they're gone now. Useless. Are they? Or could you find other children to teach those things to? Elena looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Maybe Gabriel's death doesn't have to make those plans meaningless. Maybe you carry them forward for different children who need what you have to give. Elena was quiet, turning the idea over. In Cedar Ridge, there will be children there, won't there? Mexican families trying to make a place for themselves. Most likely, Jacob said. Yes, she said quietly. Yes, I could help them. They reached Cedar Ridge on a clear morning. The town spread out in a valley between red mesas, adobe buildings and wooden structures, speaking of a community transforming from mining camp to something more permanent. It's bigger than I expected, Elena said nervously. Good. Bigger means more opportunities. They rode down the main street, taking in the sights. At the end stood a large two-story building. Henderson's boarding house. Clean rooms, good meals. Elena gathered her courage as they dismounted. Ready? Jacob asked. Ready, she said, lifting her chin with determination. Mrs. Henderson emerged before they could knock. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and shrewd blue eyes that assessed everything at once. Help you folks? She asked. I'm Jacob McKenna, and this is Elena Vasquez, Jacob said. We heard you might be looking for help. Elena stepped forward. I can cook, clean, do laundry. I know healing herbs and speak both English and Spanish. I'm willing to work hard for fair wages and a place to stay. Mrs. Henderson studied Elena's face. You running from something, girl? Elena's chin came up. Yes, ma'am. But not the law and not debt. Just a life that didn't fit me anymore. Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. Fair enough. Lord knows I've run from a few things myself. She smiled, transforming her weathered face. Can you start today? Yes, ma'am, Eleanor said with relief. Good. Come inside and I'll show you around. That evening, Jacob sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Elena emerged and settled beside him, already looking more solid, as if having a place to belong had given her back some essential part of herself. Mrs. Henderson says you're leaving tomorrow, she said. That's right. I think I might head back to Colorado. There's a homestead that needs tending. Elena nodded. That sounds like a good plan. Going home. What about you? Any regrets? Elena looked around at the town below them, lights beginning to flicker in windows. No, she said quietly. This feels right. Like something I was meant to do. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled and stars appeared. Thank you, Eleanor said quietly. For what? For giving me a choice. For showing me that it was possible to carry grief without being destroyed by it. Thank you too, Jacob said, for reminding me that helping someone else can be a way of helping yourself. Elena smiled. A real smile. The first genuine happiness he had seen from her. I think Gabriel would have liked knowing that his life helped both of us find our way back to hope. I think you're right, Jacob said. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Tomorrow would come, and for both of them, tomorrow had become something worth seeing again. As Jacob prepared to say goodbye and continue his journey toward whatever tomorrow might bring, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah and Emma died. Gratitude. He had ridden into the desert looking for a place to disappear. Instead, he had found a reason to live and helped someone else find the same thing. Sometimes Jacob was beginning to understand that was enough. The October morning in Cedar Ridge dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of mountain air that made every breath feel like a blessing. Elena Vasquez stepped out of Henderson's boarding house, her worn medical bag in one hand and a basket of fresh tortillas wrapped in clean cloth in the other. The town had undergone a remarkable transformation since her arrival. What had once been a rough collection of tents and hastily built shacks around the silver mines now boasted a proper main street lined with adobe buildings, a whitewashed church with real glass windows, and a schoolhouse where children learned their letters in both English and Spanish. Elena paused in the morning sunlight, taking in the sounds of a community coming to life. Mrs. Patterson was hanging wash on the line behind the general store, humming a hymn as she worked. The blacksmith's hammer was already ringing against his anvil, and she could hear the voices of children playing in the schoolyard, their laughter creating a cheerful symphony that mixed English and Spanish in the easy way of those who belonged to both cultures. Among those voices, Elena recognized several she had come to know intimately. There was Sofia Morales, now 10 years old, and reading fluently in both languages thanks to Elena's patient tutoring sessions every Sunday after church. Little Miguel Santos, whose difficult birth Elena had attended 2 summers ago, was chasing his older sister around the schoolyard with the boundless energy of a healthy 2-year-old. Carmen Rodriguez waved from her front porch, her arm no longer bearing the ugly scar from the mining accident, where Eleanor's poultices and careful stitching had saved both limb and life. The people of Cedar Ridge had long since stopped seeing Eleanor as simply the Mexican woman who helped Mrs. Henderson run the boarding house. She had become something more essential to the community's fabric, part healer, part teacher, part bridge, between the Anglo families who had come seeking their fortunes and the Mexican families who had been working this harsh land for generations. Her reputation had spread far beyond Cedar Ridge. Families traveled from settlements 50 miles away, seeking the curandera, who understood both the ancient wisdom of herbs and roots and the newer American medical practices she had learned from the traveling doctor who visited twice yearly. "Elena!" called Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house porch, her voice considerably stronger than it had been 3 years ago. The willow bark tea Elena prepared had worked wonders for the older woman's arthritis, and the companionship had done even more for her spirits. "There's a rider coming in from the North Road. Been traveling hard by the look of his horse." Elena shielded her eyes against the morning sun and felt her heart give an unexpected skip. Even at a distance, she recognized the familiar silhouette, the straight-backed posture in the saddle, the easy way horse and rider moved as one, the weathered buckskin horse that had carried 2 grieving souls across the desert 3 years ago. Jacob McKenna was riding into Cedar Ridge, and everything about him spoke of a man who had found his way back to living. 3 years had changed Jacob considerably. The crushing weight of fresh grief no longer bent his shoulders, though Eleanor could see that the loss of Sarah and Emma had left its mark, not as open wounds now, but as the kind of scars that spoke of battles fought and survived. His beard was fuller and streaked with silver. His face bore the permanent squint lines of someone who spent his days working under the open sky, and most notably, his eyes held something that had been absent that desperate morning in the desert. Peace. He guided Dust to the hitching post in front of the boarding house with the fluid grace of a man born to the saddle. When he dismounted and turned to face her, Elena saw the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Not the bitter, ironic twist she remembered, but genuine warmth. "Elena Vasquez," he said, removing his hat entirely this time instead of just touching the brim. "You look like a woman who's found exactly where she belongs in this world." "To Jacob McKenna," she replied, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "And you look like a man who's learned the difference between existing and living." He laughed, a rich, genuine sound that carried no trace of the barely controlled anguish she remembered. "I suppose I have, at that. The homestead's thriving now. Took on 3 families this year who needed land to work and a chance to start fresh. Young couples mostly, with children who call me Uncle Jacob and treat my place like it's their grandfather's ranch." They stood studying each other, both cataloguing the changes 3 years of purposeful living had wrought. Elena had grown into her role as the town's healer and cultural bridge, with a confidence that surprised even her. She stood straighter now, spoke with the authority of someone whose opinions were sought and valued, and carried herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who had looked death in the face and chosen life instead. "Mrs. Henderson's letters mentioned you've become quite the curandera," Jacob said, his gaze taking in her medical bag and the respectful nods from passers-by who clearly knew and trusted her. Said folks come from 3 counties over seeking Elena Vasquez's healing touch. Elena felt warmth rise in her cheeks, but it was the flush of honest pride rather than embarrassment. More than I ever dreamed when I first arrived here with nothing but grief and a handful of herbs my grandmother taught me about. But I've learned that healing isn't just about knowing which plants ease fever or help bones mend properly. It's about listening to people's fears, understanding their pain, helping them carry burdens that feel too heavy to bear alone. Before Jacob could respond, a young woman came hurrying up the street, her face flushed with exertion and barely controlled panic. Elena recognized her immediately. Maria Sandoval, whose older sister had married into the Morales family last spring. "Señora Elena, por favor, can you come quickly?" Maria's words tumbled over each other in rapid Spanish before she caught herself and switched to English. "My sister Rosa, she's been in labor since yesterday evening, but something is wrong. The baby isn't coming right, and she's so tired, and Mama doesn't know what to do, and..." Elena immediately shifted into the calm, reassuring demeanor that had become second nature over the years. "Of course, mija. Take a deep breath. These things take time, and first babies especially like to keep their own schedule." She turned to Jacob with an apologetic look. "I'm sorry, but..." "Go," he said simply, and she heard an echo of the same understanding he had shown 3 years ago when she had needed to make her choice about living or dying. "Life doesn't wait for convenient moments. I'll still be here when you're finished." Elena squeezed his arm briefly, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady strength he had rebuilt from the ashes of devastating loss. "Mrs. Henderson will take good care of you. We'll have time to talk properly this evening." The birth proved to be long and difficult, testing all of Elena's skill and experience. Rosa Morales was a small woman, attempting to deliver what was clearly going to be a large baby, and by the time Elena arrived, both mother and child were showing signs of distress. Elena spent the next 6 hours alternating between the techniques her grandmother had taught her, special teas to strengthen contractions, positioning to ease the baby's passage, and the more clinical knowledge she had gained from Dr. Williams during his visits to Cedar Ridge. "Push with the next pain, Rosa," Eleanor encouraged, supporting the exhausted woman's shoulders. "I can see your son's head. He's almost here." When the baby finally arrived, red-faced, robust, and announcing his displeasure with the world in a voice that rattled the windows, the entire Morales household erupted in tears of relief and joy. Elena cleaned the infant with practiced efficiency, checking his reflexes and color, while his exhausted mother wept with gratitude. "¿Cómo lo vamos a llamar?" Rosa whispered, gazing down at her son with wonder. "What should we name him?" Her husband, Carlos, looked at Elena with deep gratitude. "We want to call him Gabriel," he said quietly, "after the angel who protects children, if that would be all right with you, Señora Elena." Elena felt the familiar tightness in her throat, but it was different now. Not the sharp blade of fresh grief, but the bittersweet ache of love that had learned to express itself in new ways. "I think Gabriel is a perfect name," she said softly, placing the baby in his mother's arms. "Welcome to the world, little Gabriel Morales." By the time Elena returned to the boarding house, the sun was setting behind the red rock formations that surrounded Cedar Ridge, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. She found Jacob sitting on the porch steps in almost the exact same spot where they had sat 3 years ago, but everything about the moment felt transformed. Then they had been 2 broken people clinging to the fragile hope that tomorrow might be bearable. Now they were 2 whole people who had learned to transform their deepest pain into their greatest purpose. "How did it go?" Jacob asked, as she settled beside him, noting the satisfied exhaustion that spoke of work well done. "Perfect in the end. A big, healthy boy with strong lungs and his father's stubborn chin." Elena smiled, pulling her shawl closer against the cooling evening air. "They're naming him Gabriel." The father said it was for the angel who watches over children. Jacob nodded slowly, understanding the profound significance of that choice. That must feel like a blessing. It does. Every time I help bring a child safely into this world, every time I ease someone's pain or teach a young person to read, I feel like I'm honoring what Gabriel might have been. Not trying to replace him, that's impossible, but carrying forward all the love and hope I had for him. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the town settle into evening. Children were called in for supper, shopkeepers closed their doors and counted their day's earnings, and smoke began to rise from chimneys as families gathered around their tables. It was the kind of peaceful domesticity that neither of them had dared to imagine during those dark days when grief felt like it might consume them entirely. "What brings you back to Cedar Ridge after all this time?" Elena asked finally, though she suspected the answer was more complex than simple business. Jacob was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words with care. Cattle buying, partly. Need to stock the ranch for next year. But mostly, he paused, looking out at the town Elena had helped nurture into something beautiful and thriving. "I wanted to see what you'd built here. Wanted to thank you properly for what you gave me that morning in the desert." "What I gave you?" Elena's voice held genuine puzzlement. "Jacob, you saved my life. You gave me back my choice when I had forgotten I had one. You gave me something just as valuable," Jacob said quietly. "You showed me that helping someone else find their way could help me find mine too. When I left here 3 years ago, I thought I was just going back to an empty homestead to wait out whatever years I had left. Instead, I found myself building again, not just repairing buildings and fences, but creating something new. A place where families could start over, where children could grow up safe and loved." Elena turned to study his profile in the fading light. "Tell me about it. About what you've built." Jacob's face softened with an expression she had never seen before, contentment mixed with deep satisfaction. "It's become more than just a ranch. I've got the Martinez family working the north pasture, young couple with 3 little ones who lost their place in Kansas to drought. The O'Briens help with the cattle. They came out from Boston after Patrick lost his job in the factory. City folks, but they're learning fast, and just this spring I took in the widow Sarah Chen and her 2 boys. Her husband died in a mining accident down in New Mexico." "A widow named Sarah," Elena said softly, noting the way Jacob spoke the name without flinching. "Yes, seemed like something my Sarah would have wanted me to do. Help another woman named Sarah find her way to safety." Jacob's voice was steady, peaceful. "Her boys call me Uncle Jacob, and sometimes little Tommy crawls up in my lap after supper and asks me to tell stories about the old days. I never thought I'd have children's voices in my house again." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness but of joy for the life Jacob had rebuilt from the wreckage of loss. "That sounds wonderful. That sounds like exactly what you were meant to do." "What about you?" Jacob asked. "Mrs. Henderson's letters told me some of it, but I want to hear it from you. What have you built here, Elena?" Elena looked around at the town, settling into night, at the warm lights beginning to flicker in windows, at the evidence of a community that had embraced her completely. "More than I ever imagined possible," she said. "I'm not just the curandera anymore. I'm part of the school board, helping decide how to teach children who speak 2 languages and live in 2 cultures. I helped organize the women's cooperative that sells our handicrafts to travelers. Last year, when the mine owners tried to cut wages, I helped translate during the negotiations so the Mexican workers could understand their rights." "You found yourself a place to belong," Jacob observed. "I found myself a place to serve," Elena corrected gently. "And in serving others, I found myself again. The woman I was meant to be, not just the wife Miguel needed or the mother Gabriel never got to know, but Elena, whole and complete and useful to the world." As full darkness settled over Cedar Ridge and the first stars began to appear in the clear mountain air, Jacob cleared his throat. "I'm planning to stay for a week or so," he said. handle my business with the cattle dealers, but also, he hesitated, then met her eyes directly. Also to see if there might be room in your life for an old friend, someone who understands the journey you've taken because he's walked a similar path himself. Elena smiled, the expression transforming her face the way starlight transforms the desert landscape. I think there's always room in my life for friends who understand that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about learning to carry it in a way that makes you stronger instead of breaking you. And maybe, Jacob said carefully, his weathered hands turning his hat brim in his lap, for someone who's learned that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just finds new ways to express itself, new people to embrace, new purposes to serve. Elena reached over and took one of his hands, feeling the calluses earned through years of honest work, the strength that came from choosing to rebuild rather than simply endure. Maybe indeed, Jacob McKenna, maybe indeed. Above them, the vast sky of the American West stretched endlessly, filled with more stars than seemed possible, the same stars that had witnessed their first desperate meeting and now looked down on two people who had learned that even the deepest wounds could become sources of wisdom, compassion, and unexpected joy. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, not the lonely sound of an isolated creature, but the joyful song of community, of family, of home. It was joined by another voice, then another, until the night air filled with their wild harmony. Jacob squeezed Elena's hand gently. "That sounds like a celebration," he said. "Maybe it is," Elena replied, listening to the coyote's song echo off the red rock walls of the canyon. "Maybe they know something we're just beginning to understand." "What's that?" "Oh," Elena smiled up at the stars, thinking of Gabriel, of Sarah and Emma, of all the lives that had been lost, and all the lives that had been saved, and all the love that continued to flow between them like an underground river, nourishing everything it touched. "That some endings are really beginnings," she said softly, "and some beginnings are really comings home."